Hello, welcome to Red Book Joy. Today I have a reading ramble for you. And if you are new, I am Jack, welcome. If you are not new, welcome back. And if you're new, a reading ramble is my catch-all term for when I just want to talk about what I've been reading, or my thoughts on reading, or whatever I want to talk about to do with reading. I don't do wrap-ups, I don't do TBRs generally. I might do them for a specific event, but yeah, I kind of just talk about what I've been reading, what I'm going to be reading in these reading rambles. So let's get into it. I've barely finished a thing in the last 2 months, because the last time I caught you up on my reading was 2 months ago. My videos have been very much my sort of building my library videos, which are a very satisfying process, and it's finished and all the videos are up. You can go and watch them. I built my sort of personal library, my reading chair, my little reading space, and it's been just so lovely just walking in every day and seeing all of my books on these lovely shelves, being able to sit down in a dedicated reading space and read. It's just been wonderful, so I feel very fortunate, and I'm sitting here now as I talk to you, so that's been really nice. But yeah, I've just not been, I was a bit slumpy. I have to say I was in a bit of a reading slump. For about a week or two I barely read a thing, because of life stuff, and then I kept starting things and putting them down. I've got lots of things on the go at the moment, mainly a lot of non-fiction that I've just let drift, but I will go back to. And then I had a number of reading commitments with other people, buddy reads, group reads, whatever, that I needed to get finished. So because of that, and because of that accountability, I finished a few books this week. And I don't want to get to a point where I've got 20 million books to talk to you about. And I don't at the moment, really. So I'm going to catch you up on, since the last time we spoke, which was end of June, about what I've been reading. So first up, Jane Austen July. I finished Sense and Sensibility and Frankenstein. And that is all I managed for Jane Austen July. And Sense and Sensibility is a reread for me. I've planned a nice video where I sit and talk all things Sense and Sensibility, and I took some footage of Jane Austen's Devon. So I did some research and I went around and found, because it's part of my Southwest Stories project, I found some lovely locations that are thought to be inspiration for some of the sea settings in Sense and Sensibility. And yeah, I've got a nice video coming up whenever I get around to actually editing it and filming it. And then I finished Frankenstein as part of a lovely group read that I co-hosted with the lovely Ange from Ange's Book Chatter, and we had a whale of a time reading that book. I say whale of a time like it was like a last minute. It wasn't like that, but we got a really enriching group discussion with some wonderful readers joined our discussion on Voxer, and yeah, it really enhanced that reading for me, because Frankenstein's one I've wanted to read for a long time, and I'm probably one of the last people to have read Frankenstein. I've never read it before, and I enjoyed it mostly because of the reading, the group read and the discussion. I don't know if I'd have enjoyed it as much reading it on my own. I didn't like Victor Frankenstein, but I don't think you're supposed to like Victor Frankenstein, but the themes within Frankenstein of creation and nature versus nurture, and man playing God, and hubris, and the sort of lack of responsibility that people can take for or ownership over things that they've done, and that kind of thing. I mean, it was a really great book for discussion, and I loved Mary Shelley's descriptive writing particularly, I thought was very beautiful, and it was really interesting to see some of these gothic horror tropes that they are now but weren't then, like sort of one of the inspirational books behind a lot of our gothic horror tropes. So yeah, I'm really pleased I read Frankenstein, and I loved it reading with the group. We might read another book on Audrey because it was just so fantastic. The app was amazing. Yes, that might happen going forward. And then I think I basically went to see Take That in July, beginning of July, and I'm a bit of a Take That fan. So then I just read a couple of books about Gary Barlow. So I'm not going to talk about them here. They're Gary Barlow's books. There's just a fangirl moment. And funny enough, I've got a little reading rabbit hole that I've wandered down ever since reading This Is Not a Book About Benedict Cumberbatch, which is about sort of obsessions and passions, shall we say, and that's a really good book. And because of that, I've kind of been contemplating fandoms, and things have come up, quite a lot of things have come up recently that I want to read about fandoms, and I've got some books reserved that I'm hopefully getting through on BorrowBox soon. One is called Fans, and there's also another one about liking, if you're a fan of someone and then they're now a problematic figure. So that was really, I think that's really interesting. And then there's a couple of books that I've been recommended, that they're kind of biographies where people have developed parasocial relationships with famous people, like, which is where they almost like become a bit obsessed with a famous person, and how, whether that's to a healthy degree or not. So it was interesting because I went to see Take That, and I haven't seen them for a few years, and I came back like absolutely in love again with that band that I've loved since I was like 14 years old. Kind of, I suppose it just kind of gives me a lot of nostalgia, so, and I feel like I've grown up with them, and so it was interesting to explore. I think it's interesting to explore that theme, so I'm looking forward to going down that kind of reading rabbit hole, and hopefully I'll do a video on books about fandoms, because I think it's really important. And one thing that came up in This Is Not a Book About Benedict Cumberbatch is the kind of misogyny that occurs because of women and their obsessions and their interests and their hobbies. It's kind of looked down upon, or you're seen as a little bit crazy and a little bit obsessive, whereas it's all right for a man to know everything about Bob Dylan, for instance, and that's not seen as weird or creepy or obsessive. Or it's all right for men to know everything about football stats, but if a woman knows knows absolutely everything there is to know about, I don't know, like Take That, for instance, then it's seen as, not as worthwhile, or not as sane. Let's put it that way. Like, women are seen as, when they're obsessed with, or they become, and the word obsessed is probably a harsh one, but I can't think of a better one, because or if you become passionate about a band, a celebrity, whatever it may be, that you're seen as in some way having a mental health issue. So I found that really fascinating, that topic. And as someone who has, I'm a fan of, I'm book obsessed, I'm David Bowie obsessed. For about a month there I was Take That obsessed, and currently still am. But it's interesting. So I find that whole topic really fascinating. But I digress. So then I finished When Things Are Alive They Hum by Hannah Bent, and I've talked about this in my previous video. It's a wonderful book about two sisters who are half Chinese, half English, and one of them is in England studying for her PhD. The other sister is still living in Hong Kong with her father and stepmother and grandmother, and that sister has Down syndrome, and the older sister gets a phone call to say that her heart is failing. She's had a congenital heart defect, and they won't give her a heart transplant in Hong Kong because she has Down syndrome. And it's not specifically said to them, but she's not more worthwhile saving than other people who are on a heart transplant list. So it's a heartbreaking book. There's a grieving process, and the one of the sisters is going through because they lost their mother. We're seeing it from both perspectives, so there's some really joyful moments in the book as well, and just this idea that we love someone so much that we would do anything to keep them alive and keep them with us, even if it goes against their wishes. And I thought that was just handled really well in this book, and it kind of just makes you think about when you're fighting so hard for someone who is not well, or when you're trying to do what you think is right for them. Is it always what they want, or is it always what is right for them, or is it what's right for you? So I found that book really it was a pleasurable read, it was a heartbreaking read, and it was thought-provoking. So really good book. I also think it might fit in for Straya September, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit as well, because Hannah Bent, I don't think she's originally Australian. I think she's from Hong Kong, but she now lives in Australia, so she may count for Straya September. Then I got lots and lots of birthday presents, and then I got Garlic and the Vampire on my birthday, and I immediately read that as the day I got it. I got it from Alice over at Alice and Giant Bookshelf, and Garlic and the Vampire is just the sweetest little warm, fuzzy graphic novel. It's about a bulb of garlic who's been brought to life by a witch, and her and a lot of other vegetables have been brought to life, and they are helping the witch in her garden, and a vampire moves in next door, and they tell Garlic, well, you're Garlic, so surely you should go and fight the vampire. And it's just very, very sweet, and I'm really looking forward to reading the next one. It was just gorgeous. So then we started reading The Dark is Rising sequence by Susan Cooper, and this is something I'm reading with Gemma and Alice. It's one of Alice's favourite series of all time, one of her childhood favourites, and it's a series that I should have read as a child, and then I didn't. My older brother absolutely loved the series. I inherited a lot of his books. His Narnia books in particular were absolute favourites of mine. They're falling apart. I've got them over there. And he also had a copy of The Dark is Rising, just the one book, but I think he read the entire series, but he only had the one book that he owned. And the cover of it when I was a kid freaked me out so much that I never read it. Fast forward, and a few years later, and I'm working in children's section in Waterstones, and I come across it again, and I was like, I must read this one day. And it's been ongoing in my head for years, I must read this. And then Alice, we were chatting about it, and she's wanted to reread it for a long time, and she doesn't know why so many people don't know this series. And it was such a big thing when I was younger, and I never read it because of the fear. And they're quite sinister. So The Dark is Rising is a sequence of 5 books. Susan Cooper is a British author who was born in the 1930s. She's still alive. She's 88. And she is someone who lived through the Second World War. She's a family of Welsh. She's got a Welsh background, so she spent a lot of time in Wales as a child, but she lived in Buckinghamshire. She remembers air raid shelters, all that kind of thing. And she wrote the first book in the sequence, Oversea Understone, in the 60s, and then continued it in the rest of the sequence in the 70s. So these books are heavily based on British and folklore, Welsh folklore as well. I say as well, that's including Welsh, so English and Welsh folklore, and Arthurian Arthurian legend, basically. So I love anything to do with King Arthur. So the fact that I never read these is just a travesty that's being addressed now. So we read the first book in the series, which was written in the 1960s. Oh, by the way, Susan Cooper sounds like a fascinating person. She went to Oxford, and she studied English literature, and she attended lectures by Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. So this kind of literary tradition and influence on her is just phenomenal, really. So her writing is really atmospheric. She's got a great sense of place. She manages to write these really amazing, cozy domestic scenes. And the first book in the series almost feels like a completely different doesn't feel like it's part of the same series because of the feel of it. So both books had very different tones. Oversea Understone felt very much like it's the story of 3 siblings who go on holiday to Cornwall, so it fit in with my Southwest Stories project, which is great, and they discover an old map or an old document in the attic of the house they're staying in with their great uncle. And their great uncle is a kind of quite a mysterious figure. He goes treasure hunting for museums and stuff like that. So we've got a lot of really great quest themes, mysteries, and things to be solved. It really had tons of Enid Blyton vibes for me. I absolutely loved Oversea Understone. Then the second book, which is this one, is called The Dark is Rising, and it's the most famous, and it was a medal winner, I believe, an award-winning book. I might be wrong, but if this book, very, very different in tone, and you can tell she's improved as a writer. This is a book that she wrote 10, 11, 12 years after writing the first book, and I think she published the next 4 in very quick succession. So The Dark is Rising and then the following 3 books in very quick succession, and they were hugely popular series. And the second book, we meet a character called Will Stanton, and it's midwinter, and he lives in Buckinghamshire. And it's really funny because I'm doing the Southwest Stories project. Cornwall is the next county along, if you're not familiar with English geography, and it's the very tip, most southerly point in Britain is in Cornwall, and it's so that I'm living sort of southwest, so part of my Southwest Stories project, it fit in really lovely. And last year I was living in Buckinghamshire, which is a county just outside of London, and really rural, very countryside. And she's from there, so she had a lot of wonderful countryside description and nature description. There were absolutely beautiful domestic scenes in this book because we meet Will Stanton. He's the youngest of 9 children, and it's midwinter, and they're going to they celebrate Christmas in this book. So there's tons of amazing wintry scenes, Christmas scenes, and almost like a bygone era of England as well, because it's like village life in the 70s. So it's kind of like a slice of life from that time, but it's interspersed with a lot of magical goings on and quite sinister writing as well. Some very dark moments in The Dark is Rising, and Will discovers that he is I'm not going to go into it because it's a spoiler, but I will do some videos on The Dark is Rising, so I think they're important books. I think they're important books in the history of children's literature, especially British children's literature. I think they should be better known, and I'm really glad we started reading them. I didn't enjoy this one as much as Oversea Understone. I think Oversea Understone gave me sort of summer holiday nostalgia vibes. It's set in the summer and it is the summer, whereas this I feel is a great book for reading in the winter. And I felt at one point I turned on my Govee light, and you can put a snowstorm on the light. I put that on, and I put up some sort of dark, stormy stuff on my YouTube. So I was reading it, and I'm frightening the life out of myself reading this book. But it was very good. It's a very good book. The more I think about it, the more I liked it. What I didn't like is the unexplained magical happenings, which smacks a little bit of magical realism for me. But I'm not a child, and children kind of tend to accept things a little bit more readily than I do. So yeah, anyway, I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. Then I finished Song of Achilles. I'm not going to talk about this too much. It's Madeline Miller's retelling of the love story between Achilles and Patroclus, who are companions in the Iliad, and their relationship is extremely close, to the point where Madeline Miller has reimagined this as a love story, which I can firmly believe. Like, this reads so beautifully. I'm not going to talk about it too much more, but it's a great retelling. It's one of the best myth retellings for me, and we're going to talk about it over on Alice's channel this evening. By the time this video goes out, that will already have happened, so I'm going to link our very spoiler-filled chat in the description box below. But yes, this was our FOMO book club pick for July and August, and another successful FOMO book club pick. If you don't know about FOMO book club, it's the book club I run with Alice and Gemma, and it's about the books we feel we missed out on. I'd already read this, but they hadn't, and sometimes a few of us have done rereads because they're just such good books. But the FOMO book club is one book every 2 months. It's very casual. We're going to be reading The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield for October and November. September and October. So yeah, join us for that if you like. We've also just picked the next 6 books for the FOMO book club, and I'll link that in the description box below. And then last night I finished A Room with a View by E.M. Forster, and I can't wait to watch the film. I was buddy reading this with Claudia from Spencer's Library. It's my second Forster, won't be my last Forster. I really enjoyed buddy reading this. This is the sort of book that you definitely need to buddy read, I find. I read Howard's End with Marilyn Meyer Mendoza and Berna from Berna's Bookish Adventures, I think I got that right, last year, and we loved it because it's the perfect book for discussion. I don't think Forster will be for everybody. In fact, I know Forster won't be for everybody. I find Forster really tricky to read because there is a ton of subtext, and it might appear at some points that not a lot's happening, but there is a ton of subtext in Forster, so it's a great for a buddy read because you're kind of picking apart character motivations and things. A Room with a View is supposed to be Forster's sunniest novel, and it was really, really excellent, actually. The more I think about it, I think a book that leaves you thinking about it after you've put it down is got to be a good book, right? So I was still thinking about this, and I'm still thinking about it after putting it down yesterday. But it's a story of Lucy, who goes on holiday to Florence with her older spinster cousin Charlotte as a chaperone, and they stay in this pension, or whatever you call it, hotel, I don't know how you pronounce it, in Florence, and they meet a number of characters there, and Lucy has an encounter with a young man called George Emerson, and that changes her, that affects the next few months for her. I didn't realise that part of the book was set back in England, and it is. They come back to England and the story continues in there. And actually, I think I preferred, I love the descriptions of Florence and Italy and everything else, but I think I preferred the second half of the book back in England a bit more, because that almost was like very plot driven. I'm quite a plot driven reader, and a lot happened in the second half of the book. But yeah, really enjoyed it. A Room with a View. And there were tons of themes and motifs to pick apart in Forster's writing that kept reoccurring and occurring. Lots of things about rooms and views, funny enough, came up. And Cloud and I were trying to sort of unpick what this kind of all meant. And we kind of came to the conclusion that, like, really at the centre of all of this, it's this idea of being authentic and true to yourself and true to those around you, and getting to know someone on an authentic, intimate level. And that when they were discussing views, and they were discussing just being in a room or looking out at a view of nature, that is kind of almost this kind of symbolism for nature and being natural and being yourself and being authentic, I think. So we were kind of, you know, picking that apart, and that was our thoughts on it. So yeah, I might do a video on it. I say these things and then I never do, so you never know. Don't hold your breath. So I've got a lot of reading at the moment to do. I've got some buddy reads and things coming up in October, and one of them is The Sword of Kaigan, which is a huge fantasy novel, and then another one was supposed to be Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier, and I'm thinking of dropping Frenchman's Creek because I've got to a point. I've done what I promised myself I wouldn't do this year, and I've started over-committing to things, and I think that's where I'm going wrong with my reading and not finishing reading, because I don't have any wiggle room to follow my nose and read with my mood. So I'm thinking I just need to go back to what I promised myself I would do no more than one project, like group or buddy read a month, and I've been doing several. So that's kind of, I've realised I sat down and I was like, why am I not getting really into my books? Why have I not got anything that I've loved? Like, why have I've not had time to sit with a book, just me and the book, and I'll follow my nose on certain projects like the fans project and the things I want to read. So yeah, I'm going to try and cut back on my commitments. There's a lot of really good stuff coming up in September though, for which I have books that I can read and I might read on my own rather than buddy read. But currently I want to finish Rotherweird by Andrew Caldecott. And this is the start of a series, and so far I've not read that much of it, just this much, but it's really interesting. It kind of gives me Jasper Fforde vibes, but not as humorous. And it's kind of like an alternate England where a group of very gifted children in the 16th century were banished by Mary Tudor to live in a town called Rotherweird because they were like an abomination. They just didn't want them around. And then Rotherweird has its own laws, and Rotherweird now in modern times, they're not allowed to study history. People, like, Rotherweird's like a town on its own, quite isolated from the rest of England. So yeah, it's really interesting. And then I'm reading The Mountains Sing, which I've had on my shelves for a while, and it's all about a family. It's a intergenerational saga set in Vietnam, and the Vietnam War comes into play in it, as well as modern Vietnam, I believe. So I've only just started it, and this was my book for the World Cup readathon. I've got a few books to read for the World Cup readathon, because I had Vietnam and they got beaten by quite a lot of people. So yeah, that's one of those, the routes I'm reading for that. And then coming up, we've got some really nice things happening in September. There's Straya September, which is a brand new readathon all about Australian literature, being hosted by Scott over Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. Go and check out Scott's video on that. And then we've also got Shaketember happening. I've never really felt an interest in reading too much Shakespeare, like, for itself, but I feel like I'm missing out. So I don't know if I'm going to do it this year, but Shaketember is being hosted by Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading, and Jason from Chapter and Verse, and Nicole from A Day of Small Things, and they are all fantastic hosts, and they're very enthusiastic, because I watched Nicole's video today and just like, you actually make me want to read some Shakespeare. So then there's also Shorty September, and that's being hosted by Sian and Bert from Past Story Time and Heather Soggy Pat Book Nerd. And that's to read books, short books in September. There are prompts for all of these things, but I feel like you can take part without going mad and trying to fill all the prompts. But Shorty September is about reading short books. So that'd be quite good, because I've got a number I could do and get off of my TBR and enjoy. And I love sometimes just sit down with a short book and finish it in a day. I love that. So yeah, Shorty September is one I will be taking part in, I think. But yeah, other than that, I'm going to try not to put so much pressure on myself and remind myself to say no to things going forward, because I'm enjoying what I'm reading. I'm enjoying the buddy reads. I love a buddy read. I love a group read. But when I've got too many on, I know I don't have a lot of time for reading in my life. So I often say I'm in the slow readers club because I don't read as much as any other booktuber, but it's not true. I just don't have the time. I don't have the time. I make time for reading every day, but my reading time some days is so limited. So I'm forced into reading, keeping up with group reads, keeping up with buddy reads, and I don't want them to feel like a chore. And they haven't felt like a chore in the sense that I'm not enjoying the books or I'm not enjoying the chat, and because I love all of that, and I love people reading with me. I just feel like I need a little bit of a break from that, because my mood reading self has had no opportunity to do any mood reading, and I need that back. So anyway, I'm going to stop rambling now. So if you've got to this part of the video, and I'm sorry for all the ramble, let me know, are you taking part in any of these readathons that are coming up? What have you been reading lately? Anything good? And yeah, just drop me an emoji in the description box below. Drop me a food emoji to tell me what you're that you've been kept here to this part of the video, and hopefully I'll see you again here soon. Bye.